Back in the old garage. I'm going to do a tutorial soon because I've done a few modifications and upgrades, and I'm going to do some cooling upgrades too. But enough of that. I always go through my comments if you're a follower of the channel, and you know that I respond to most of them. Sometimes a lot, and I try to go through them. I appreciate people taking the time to write. I saw a comment when I did this video on the electric appliance charger thing that Stellantis dumped on the American public, and they can't sell, but that's neither here nor there. And the comment was an argument that I've heard for at least the last 10 years, that the electric appliances are doing what the car did to horses at the turn of the last century. This argument holds zero water. It actually pulls out one of the great fallacies in logic, where you just kind of transpose a previous event that happened, and even though your event has nothing similar to that event, you're going to try to make comparisons and equal them out. And that's not really the way it works. So, yeah. So let's go back. Let me show a couple pictures here. All right, let's go back to 1900. I'm going to use New York City because New York City was a giant city at that time. It had 3.5 million people living in it. And back then, they had a couple ways of transportation. You could walk, you could take a streetcar, because by then they had streetcars in 1905, or you'd use a horse. Now, New York City was home, and it's hard to get a real number for it, but it was home to a couple 100,000 horses, which is fine and dandy, horse for transportation, when you have a few hundred people in your village, or a few hundred in your town. But when you start having that many in close proximity, you start having problems. And this is what was gearing up at the beginning of the end of the previous century, the 19th century, into the 20th. In 1894, they had a sanitation disaster happen in New York because the population exploded with all the new immigrants, and people were using horses. And the horses do one thing constantly: they poop. And they poop like 15 pounds of poop a day. I mean, seriously, that's a lot of crap. And there was no services to try to get rid of the poop. So poop would pile up everywhere, and it rained, it would turn to poopy slop. So in 1894, New York, started their sanitation to try to clean the streets. I mean, it was an okay attempt, but honestly, it didn't truly stop the pollution from the horses, because you can't. And in areas that weren't New York City, you had these horses, and they would poop everywhere, and it would be mixed with mud, and it would make fun little diseases like Giardia, Salmonella, Leptospirosis, which is very under control now today. And dogs and cats can get it from fouled water, but it also people can get this too. And it was from the poop that was in the streets. So America was ready, especially America was ready to move on to something else. And Henry Ford took Daimler's idea and he modernized it, he Americanized it. He built an assembly line so he can make cars quicker and faster. All right, let's go back to 1900. Let me show this picture. You see, there's a car. Okay. So then, cars were a little expensive at first. It was like $700, but a horse was a few $100s also. In 1913, the second picture of the same street, now there's one horse on there. That's how fast cars got adopted, because they solved the problem that people were having. The cars had gotten cheaper than horses, just on getting them. Now, the other part of having a horse is that you need to feed it constantly. It eats a lot, 15 to 30 pounds of hay a day. You got to put it somewhere. You can't just like stick the horse, outside on your front porch. It's not kind to, especially when it's cold or hot. They need a little bit of protection. Usually they're in stables. So you had to have housing for these horses. They need to have constant care with their feet because you had to have a blacksmith or a farrier come and put new shoes on them, also to trim their hooves and trim their teeth. They have to be floated, and they have to be brushed constantly and washed and cleaned because they got fleas and all other sorts of things that they had no treatments for like we do today. So I mean, honestly, it was a very, very complicated, expensive undertaking by the turn of the 20th century to have a horse. And to keep it in any type of urban area was an absolute nightmare. So now, as the car becomes more available, people realize that they can have a car. They just put this new stuff in it called gasoline. They can drive it, make sure the air is, I think first they had solid tires, then they had pneumatic tires. Just make sure the tires were okay, had fluids in it, and you drive it. And you just park it on the street next to your house, in front of your house, or in your driveway if you had one, or on your front lawn, wherever you wanted to put it, under a lean-to. And you could just leave it there. And then the next day you could come out, start it up again, and drive off. It really made an amazing change in America. Because before that, with a horse, you could travel maybe 20 miles in a day, if you're lucky, if it wasn't hot or it wasn't too cold, or the terrain wasn't too rough. But with a car, you can do, even back then, with just the terrible roads they had and the slow cars, you can easily do 50, 60, 100 miles in a day if you really pushed it. Without even trying. No effort on your part. Just making sure you put fluids in there, that gasoline. But you can carry gasoline with you. That's the beauty of a gas-powered car. You can keep the power supply with you. Okay, so now let's go to the turn of this century and the introduction of the electric appliance. Electric thing has been trying to be pushed on this country now for a long time. They sell a few of them, but honestly, in comparison to the amount of actual cars and trucks that are sold in this country, it is a very, very small thing. And here is where it is different. Back then, you had a real and physical pollutant that actually was killing people right there and then. What they've tried to do after we've cleaned up cars to the point where all they put out is, plant food, CO2, water, a little carbon monoxide, because you got to have that from, something burning, that they tried to make a new pollutant out of, plant food, CO2, to push, this rain, this thing that actually goes less far, needs a lot more maintenance, does not have quite the lifespan, is incredibly expensive, and at the get-go is actually quite a highly pollutive thing, because last time I looked, getting lithium is not a clean process. Weird. And also all the plastic in those cars, guess where that comes from? Petroleum. It comes from, oil, that type of stuff. So it's definitely not the same, because people were not looking for a better way to move from A to B, per se, like they were back then. Because back then, I mean, you had this living, breathing creature that would die in maybe 10 to 15 years from working hard. And then you had to go spend more money to go get a new one. And then you had all to keep on going, and you had the poop and all the... It really did not mesh with the modernization of America, because the Industrial Revolution had come and the horse was something that was out of place. Nothing has happened like that in the last 30 years. We had a technology revolution where we now have a lot more computing power and the ability to communicate long distance like I'm doing with you right now. But none of that, beckoned, to have something you have to plug in constantly, and you can only drive a few hundred miles. We have to plug in and sit there for hours and wait for it to wait for it to charge. That if it gets wet, it will catch fire. If it gets too hot, it will catch fire. If the computers go out on it, it won't move. There is no leap forward. It is absolutely the most farcical argument I've ever heard in my entire life. And it really isn't, it isn't a giant step forward like a car was to the horse. It really isn't. We have basically, we reached peak car, and there's really not much more to squeeze out of them except maybe to enlargen what we've learned, because cars are 1,000 times more efficient than they were even 30 years ago. But because of regulations, we don't really see it because they put too small an engine with a turbo, and in real world, you don't get what you're supposed to get. It's just the way it works. So, those are my thoughts on this incredibly silly argument that makes no sense at all, and it seems like it's pure cope. I would love to hear your comments, and if you've watched to this point, cool. Thank you very much. You can also do the like, subscribe, share it, whatever. Because, I do it. And of course, when you do comment, I will read them. I will respond to them. I'm just a car guy trying to have a little fun with this. So, let me know. And as always, if you have a cool old car, it's been very cold, so they're covered to stay warm. Or if you have something fun, yeah, it's covered too. Come on out, take them out, because you'll make someone's day, including your own. Or maybe your own. One of those things. All right, I'll catch you soon.